Good morning, everybody. I am Mónica Pérez Cabero, Science Officer at the COST Association. Let me welcome you all to this COST webinar about the new virtual networking tools. Thank you very much for joining us via the Zoom meeting and via our YouTube channel where we are streaming live. We hope that this event can help all the action participants to solve all the potential questions and doubts that you might have about our new virtual networking tools. Let me first give the floor to our director, Ronald de Bruin, and our head of science operations, Anusa Panjwani, who would like to welcome you as well. Ronald and Anusa.
Thank you very much, Monica, and a very warm welcome to you all. I noticed that we have many grant holders and action chairs who connected this morning. The counter is still going up, I see. Allow me just to point out that earlier this week, it was Tuesday afternoon to be precise, we had the ministerial conference of COST, where all the ministers of the countries that are a member of COST came together to approve a declaration marking, let's say, another 5 years of overwhelming political support for the continuation of the COST program. Indeed, it coincides with the fact that COST is here since 1971. So that is why you see here our, let's say, festive logo for this year. Now, of course, in all those 50 years, a pandemic is not something that we were used to. And when this occurred last March, I would say, but it's already more than a year ago, so last year, March, of course, just like everyone else, we were a bit taken by surprise. So the obvious response from our side was, of course, to do firefighting and see who got really entangled in which kind of situation in the field, and what could we possibly do from our end to help. And we realized at that moment that that was limited, because we were bound to the rules of the EU's financial, let's say, rules. Nevertheless, we were not that long ago, fortunately, in a position to say, look, those people who could not be included in this reimbursement, let's say, approach, in particular those who participated or wanted to participate in a meeting that was cancelled, or their employer suddenly said you're not allowed to travel and activities did not take place. There was initially no, let's say, justification under the European Union's rules to accommodate the expenses. And I was very happy that some time ago our board took a decision to use their own pot of money to compensate exactly for those cases. And we have reached out, as you without any doubt know, to the grant holders to see if there are still any cases pending, in order to make sure that also these people could submit their reimbursement claim. So that was at the early stage. We then put also in place a couple of measures. Immediately we granted a blanket arrangement for extensions. We are still giving extensions also with budget. I think that's important. Of course, networking activities face-to-face all dropped to a very low level. But at the same time, we tried to accommodate, let's say, expenditures that were made for licenses for virtual networking, let's say, platforms like Zoom or Teams, etc. Then, let's say, in that phase, when we tried to work together with you, and of course we could not accommodate all the wishes, that is also very fair to say, but we were able to take on board the new actions without any delay by organizing all our MC1 meetings online. And because of that, there was a very good start and a timely start also of the new actions that were launched October last year. Now, following that, we have been in, I would say, an intense negotiation with the European Commission about the introduction of virtual networking grants. And of course, this is something else than the, let's say, the virtual networking platforms that we are using. But a grant would actually cover the effort that people put in the context of a cost action itself. So that is something that we have negotiated for and argued for a long time with the European Commission, and I'm very happy that we came with a satisfactory result. And today, I think, is a very good opportunity for you to familiarize yourself a bit more. You received a letter with the two types of virtual networking grants that we have in mind. My colleague Anusha Panjwani and her other colleagues, of course, will also give you more explanation and all the ins and outs, and are able to take all the questions that you have. But what is important to mention is that it's a pilot, indeed. So that is the magic word to have things, let's say, introduced at a good speed. At the same time, we hope and also we expect that the uptake of these grants will be such that there is a good case to continue this in the next framework program. So as of the 1st of November, the cost, let's say, association will enter into a new contract with the Commission under Horizon Europe. And we are preparing to indeed mainstream these tools, these grants, I have to be precise, for virtual networking. So that's why I'm very pleased to see so many of you. I think the counter, including, of course, our own crew, is indicating more than 180 people connected. So I hope you can take the full benefit of this webinar. And I really hope that this initiative will help you progress further in these difficult circumstances. So thank you very much for your attention. And Anusha, I would like to hand over to you.
Thank you, Ronald. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Anusha Panjwani, and I'm the Head of Science Operations at COST. Thank you for joining us on this glorious morning or afternoon, depending on which time zone you're based in. And thanks to Ronald for clearly phrasing the context, because the presentation that we're going to be sharing with you this afternoon, it's quite important that you bear this in mind with the wider context of the kind of pressures and restrictions that we've been under. So, of course, it goes without saying, when the pandemic first started, none of us could have predicted the gravity or the extent of the pandemic. But what became clear soon into the pandemic was that there was an urgent and unmet need from you, the research community, for some sort of tools to be in place to enable you to continue delivering on the objectives of your action and continuing your activities as a networking group. As you know, networking is what is key to COST. So we initiated a proposal which we put forward to the Commission for their approval on virtual networking grants. And as you know, and I'm very happy to say that these were launched on the 28th of April. And these two virtual networking grants are virtual networking support and virtual networking mobility. And we trust that these grants will enable you in continuing to deliver the kind of activities that you hope to and you aim to do so as part of your action. Of course, it's important to say that this does not replace face-to-face activity, but it does complement face-to-face activity. So without further ado, I would like to pass on to our colleagues, our scientific officers, as well as administrative officers, Giuseppe, Monica, and Carmen Sita, to walk you through these grants, help you understand why we introduced these grants, which is pretty clear, but to just phrase it again. Walk you through the details of these grants, how they're different and independent of each other, and how they're different to our existing tools. And then, of course, that will be followed by a Q&A, and we'll be happy to take any questions that you may have. And lastly, I'd like to say at the end of this webinar, it does not mean that there'll be no more room for clarifications and Q&A, because our science officers and administrative officers are always around to help answer any questions that you may have. So Monica, over to you, and thank you to everyone in advance for joining in and for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anusha and Ronald, for this welcome and introduction. Before we start, please let me introduce as well my colleagues that will be with me today as part of the hosting team. Carmencita Malimán, Senior Administrative Officer.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, and we do hope that you will find this webinar very useful in running and managing your cost action.
Thank you. We also have with us Aldona Gembalik, Administrative Officer.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you, Aldona. And we also have Giuseppe Lugano, also Science Officer at Cost Association.
Hello, thank you, Monica. Welcome, everyone, to this webinar.
Okay, we are going to start. I'm going to share my screen again to start with the... okay. Good. The agenda for the webinar of today includes the points you can see in the slide. After the welcome, we will go through a general overview of the virtual networking tools, and then we will show you how to navigate in the information we have provided, how to solve your questions, and how to prepare an application for one of the new grants we have available now. At the end, we will have a dedicated session to solve all the questions that you might have after our presentation. Now we are going to explain some rules of etiquette for our webinar today. Carmencita, can you please take the floor?
Yes, thank you, Monica. So for etiquette of today's webinar, so this webinar will be recorded only in YouTube via live streaming. So we're running in parallel in YouTube right now under the cost account. But this actual webinar will not be recorded. Your name will not be visible because you are all attendees. So please your audio is also disabled, as you will notice. Use a chat function for technical issues only, because actually there is a Q&A function at the bottom, where your control panel is for Zoom. You can ask questions anonymously, or you can also put your name if you want to. And the good news is that you can also upvote the other's question, just in case you can't think and then you see it there, you like that question, simply outvote. This will also help us at least realize what are the most pressing and important questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmencita. Okay, Len, we are going to be ready to start already. Okay, to understand a bit the background of this project, it's important to remark things that already Ronald and Anusha explained in their welcome, but definitely the COVID pandemic has highlighted the important role of digital tools to ensure our continuity in our lives and in our work activities. Also, we know it has been a very difficult period for the cost actions to continue with their plans, relying mainly on face-to-face activities and events. That is why COST has introduced some changes since April 2020 by adapting the current networking tools to the virtual setting. In this slide, you can see your well-known current networking tools based on the different types of meetings, training school, dissemination activities, and some grants, such as the ITC conference grants and short-term scientific missions. This is the list defined in our contractual agreement with the European Commission. Even if the margin for maneuver was very narrow, COD did some adaptations of the current eligibility rules to adapt them better to the virtual setting and to your actual needs. Some of these modifications were to include, for example, the cancellation insurances as eligible cost for traveling and to the local organizers. Also, we consider eligible as well the participation, the conference fees for virtual events in the case of ITC conference grants and dissemination meetings. As well, the technical support was included as an eligible expense for the LOS of virtual meetings. And we have definitely reinforced the use of all kinds of dissemination material. As well, as Ronald explained at the beginning, we allow the actions to use up to 500 euros for subscriptions and licenses for communication tools as Zoom or Teams under OERSA as a special provision for the actions, and also the cost communication unit prepared a super nice online toolkit with ideas and networking tips to help the actions to keep connected. These changes were very well accepted by the actions, but it was not enough, and it was clearly reported many times by all of you. We knew that it was necessary to work on something extra to help the actions further, since the situation with regards to the pandemic was not improving fast enough to allow the face-to-face activities to resume. This was precisely the starting point of the VNT pilot project. The main idea then was to create a new networking tool dedicated to push the uptake of the virtual collaboration. This will definitely help to recognize the extra work that the organization of online activities require, and this will also help to boost the action budget expenditure, which affects also the FSAC. This boost of the expenditure will not only be for the budget you can use for these new tools, but because this will also help the organization of more and more activities in the action, acting as a catalyst of other events. We started then working in a project for the creation of these new tools with the following aims. Definitely to promote the virtual networking in the cost actions and cost innovators grants to support continuity and alleviate challenges during the COVID pandemic, but also beyond. We wanted also that these tools could help to build capacity and spread the uptake of virtual collaboration across different research communities. And definitely, this was also a project that will help COST to pilot the future, making room for ourselves to further adapt in the context of Horizon Europe. The idea was definitely to continue with these tools also in Horizon Europe, to continue with the virtual collaboration as a complement for traditional ways of collaboration in a face-to-face environment. The project was submitted to the Commission for evaluation, and after several rounds of discussions, we got the final approval last 23rd of March 2021. Already explained by Anusa at the beginning, but this project will run as a pilot until the end of the COST program under Horizon 2020, which is set on the 31st of October 2021. Depending on the uptake and the success metrics, it may continue under Horizon Europe program. This is definitely our intention. But okay, what are these new tools? A bit of the description of the project more in details, and in essence, the new virtual networking tools are two new types of grants. We will have now one grant for virtual networking support, VNS grant, and grants for virtual mobility, VM grant. The virtual for the networking support, the VNS grant, is a grant to stimulate virtual collaboration among all the members of a given action by designating a virtual networking support manager. In the case of the virtual mobility grants, are grants to strengthen the existing networks by allowing individual participants to foster collaboration, exchange knowledge, learn new techniques by performing activities that maybe do not need in-person presence. There are some similarities of the virtual mobility grant with an STSM or an ITC conference grant. However, the scope is broader and flexible enough to accommodate all kinds of action needs to progress on MOU objectives. In this slide, we are going to explain a bit more the characteristics of the grants. As they were explained to you before in the letter and in the documents we have provided to all the actions. You can see the comparison between both of them. In the case of the specific information about the financial support for the grants, you can see in the virtual networking support grant, we are going to support maximum one grant with a maximum of 4,000 euros per action per grant period. In the case of the virtual mobility grants, is going to be allowed a maximum of 6 grants with a maximum of 1,500 euros each, making a total of 9,000 euros per action per grant period. This will allow the actions to allocate maximum 13,000 euros for virtual networking tools in their current work and budget plan. Very important, please note that COST will not provide extra budget for these new grants, and the actions are expected to reallocate a budget from your underspending, current underspending from other activities that maybe you could not perform, you could not carry out. This is expected to be reallocated from your current budget. These grants are defined as maximum amounts that can be reduced by the management committee based on the criteria that you all have to define. This is the same as in the other grants in the STSMs or ITC conference grants and also in other networking tools. About the duration, we have also some differences. The grant duration in the case of the virtual networking support grant is going to be equivalent to the duration of the current grant period. That can be maximum 31st of October 2021. Maybe some actions are finishing before this date, so this will be the top date for the grant. In the case of the virtual mobility grant, the duration will depend on the activity. There is no minimum. It can be also 1 day, 2 days, up to the duration that the applicant, also the MC, decides. Who can apply? This refers to the eligibility, and it's important to know that all individuals from participating COST countries and MC observers from near neighbor countries in your actions are eligible to apply for these grants. Okay, now in this slide, we are going to show the activities that are expected to be performed by the successful applicants, but this is just an example, it's not limited to this, and we are going to simply detail some examples in the slides. In the case of the virtual networking support grantee, that will have a coordination role in the action, this grantee will become the virtual networking support manager. This person is expected to prepare a strategy on virtual networking for the action, support the Action Management Committee in the discussions and planning of virtual events, assist in the selection of hosts for the virtual networking events, and also oversee the selection of the most appropriate virtual tools for each specific virtual activity. For example, this person can decide and can discuss which is best if organizing a webinar, a virtual conference, an online library, considering the needs of the action, demonstrating the principle of the best value for money, and of course, thinking about the GDPR. This person is also expected to support the call coordination of the virtual mobility grants. It will be an extra responsibility that this person should take by having this grant. In the case of the virtual mobility grants, we said before that the grantees can cover activities of different duration. We are also going to list here some examples, but we expect that after the implementation, we will receive much more examples by the creativity that you normally show in the actions. Of course, these grants can be used for the support in the harmonization and standardization of methods and procedures within the action networking activities. For example, maybe you need to set up a survey amongst the action members, coordinating the discussion to create common protocols or preparing questionnaires. This grant can also be used, for example, to support the implementation of research-related activities that do not need in-person presence. For example, computational or modeling activities, data analysis of the action for a specific report or activity. We have also considered as a possibility to use these grants for the virtual mentoring scheme, with a special focus on activities and exchanges that can generate capacity and build new skills, particularly for early career investigator researchers. We also consider that could be interesting to have these grants as well, maybe for a person to work on the content preparation and coordination of science communication activities, for example, in the organization of a massive online open course, of a training school, or in the organization of online workshops like webinar series or TV-like series format, etc. We know that we are going to receive more and more ideas from you, and we would like to share also these ideas with the rest of the actions, because this is how we think we can help you all better. About the process, I will go quick through this slide, not in detail, because after we will have some more information about how is the process defined in eCost, and my colleague Giuseppe will explain this. But basically, to make a comparison, it's important to know that the process will be exactly the same in both grants. The Action MC will decide whether and when to launch a call for these grants, for these proposals. The applicants interested in doing some special activity will submit the application based on a template that is available on eCost. The only difference that we see is in the level 3, where in the case of the virtual networking support grant, the action chair will be the one coordinating the MC decision process on eCost to decide who will be the applicant that will receive the final grant. In the case of the virtual mobility grants, this task is expected to be done by the virtual networking support manager in case the action has already appointed one. After we have the final step, that is always the grant holder who issues the grant letter upon decision of the grant awarding and the payment upon report. This is exactly the same process as in the STSMs and the ITC conference grants. About the implementation, I can say that the project was launched last 28th of April, more or less 1 month after the approval from the Commission. In order to implement the project after the approval, a lot of work needed to be done. And we have worked now in some updates in the COST website. You know that the Vademecum has a special new section dedicated to these new tools. We have a document with several questions and answers that we have collected, thinking that it might help to the applicants and to the actions. We have a new eCost implementation, and we have also worked on a special guidelines on the use of eCost for the applications of virtual networking tools. We expect a quick and successful uptake of these new grants by the running actions. We will continue supporting all of you in the next months for this. These are here some of the next steps we have from the perspective of the Cost Association for you to understand why this rush and why we need a quick uptake, because we are going to have to send a report to the Commission the 22nd of July to see the status report of the virtual networking tool pilot project. So we will need to have results after the implementation of the project in the actions to see how much the actions were taking use of these new grants and how successful it was. The end of the grant period, including the end of the VNT pilot project, will be 31st of October 2021. And after, just for your information, but this is not related to anything related to the actions, we will have as a cost to report the final report of this project, also together with the final report we need to submit at the end of the current grant period to the European Commission, which will be by December 2021. Now I'm going to stop sharing. And I would like to ask, for the moment, if there are some urgent questions or comments in the chat.
Yes, indeed, we have received few questions already. I will read one which was upvoted most. So
Okay.
The question is, do we need a new work and budget plan approval of MC to include the funds dedicated to virtual networking tools and virtual grants?
Okay, very interesting question, actually. Indeed, there is no need to make any amendment, any modification of the current work and budget plan to allocate budget to these virtual networking tools. You have to consider that this is a new activity, but imagine, for example, that when you start the grant period, you have a work and budget plan with non-training schools. So if you don't have a training school, but in the middle of the period, you suddenly have the need of having a training school, then the normal procedure for the actions is to allocate budget from other activity that maybe was not going to be performed to the training school, and we create this new activity in the work and budget plan. This normally requires a science officer validation from the Cost Association, and then this is normally discussed with us, and then now it's expected to happen exactly the same. Now, from the activities that you are having under spent budget, you can perfectly, after now, this is already implemented in ECOS, you can already ask your science officer for this approval, also discuss with the MC, ask the approval of the MC. This is always the first step, and after discuss with your science officer, and then this activity can be already allocated in your current work and budget plan without any need of making a new one or making any amendment.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you, Aldona. I think that now we can give the floor to Giuseppe, that will continue with the second part of the presentation.
Thank you, Monica. Yes, there will be time soon to go through all the other questions, and I see many questions are coming. I encourage participants still to encode more. Now we look a little bit from moving from the theory to the practice. So Monica provided a good overview on the concepts, on the rules. Now let's look a little bit at the documentation and the e-cost implementation, and maybe some tips on how to, on the practical integration of VNT into the action activities. So some first steps. Now you, little bit more than a week ago, you just got the information about the launch of these new grants. The first step is actually to get familiar with this new information. This webinar is also supporting you in this task, but actually most of the work is also investment from your side in processing all the documents that we made available. And of course, also alone, individually, but also discussing with the other key action participants. And this brings to the second point. The discussion with the management committee is key. We understand that now, after the launch of the virtual networking tools, the MC is already aware, so the information about the launch has been circulated widely in the action. And what else you need to discuss? Actually, the main point is about how VNT can be implemented in the context of your action needs. As you see, these new grants and tools are quite flexible, but they need to be contextualized to the needs of your action. So this means how can they contribute to the achievement of your action objectives and deliverables, and be a useful add-on to the existing networking tools. Let's consider now each specific VNT grant in this context. So in relation to the virtual networking support grants, taking a step back, in the past months, your action had to adapt to the difficulties of the COVID-19 crisis by making larger use of the virtual networking, what our director was referring to as a kind of business continuity and need to keep going with the activities. How has this worked so far? And how could it be improved? I think that after several months, you already gained experience with this, not only technical experience, but also how to make use of these tools in connection to the action needs. Now, with the introduction of the VNT grants, we take a next step, and you can start thinking also in terms of, okay, what are suitable profiles, people in your action to take the role of VNS manager? Actually, I see that from the questions, you already asked this question, so you're already in the right direction in this discussion. It's an important question because the VNS manager will support the MC, the whole MC and the whole action in assessing all these aspects and putting together an overall strategy for virtual networking to be followed by the action. We believe that digital networking is going to stay, so I think this is a first step also for a kind of a renewed collaboration for the future of the action. Of course, this virtual networking strategy is now for the pilots, but we believe also it will be helpful for your future. This strategy is not only about how to use the VNT grants. It is an overall strategy on virtual networking in which the VNT grants will need to find their own space. In relation to the virtual mobility grants, Monica already provided some examples of activities that could fall under the scope of these grants, also making clear that as costs, we are keen in learning how also will you come up with other activities that could fit in this context. The MC shall discuss which virtual activities are most suitable for the virtual mobility grants. In this case, there are some limitations to be kept in mind. In general, what can be already implemented with other existing networking tools should not be included under the virtual mobility grants. And what is not eligible with existing networking tools will continue not to be eligible with the virtual mobility grants. So this is a kind of a simple check whether the activity you have in mind can fall under the virtual mobility grants or not. After the discussion within the MC and these aspects are clear, you need to define and publish the call for the VNT grants, including a clear evaluation criteria. In the end, it is the MC to discuss and review the applications and follow the criteria to award the grants, or a committee decided by the MC. Promote the call widely through the action channels, in particular the action website, but also mailing lists or other channels you're using. And encourage applicants and assist them with answering their questions if needed, with the preparation and submission of the VNT applications. Now, an important point, some of you observed already that the pilot duration is has a tight timeline. It is also important then in the context of the MC discussion to set a target by when you plan to start receiving applications. Let's say mid-June, beginning of June. This means that a good investment of time now into the VNT planning should take place. Now, in the next slides, we will focus on the steps 1, get familiar with the information, and the number 3, prepare and submit VNT applications on e-costs, as the number 2 is quite specific to each action. In this context, do not hesitate to contact your action SO and AO for more guidance. So let's start with an overview or where to find relevant information and documentation on virtual networking tools. Since the launch of the virtual networking tools on the 28th of April, the homepage of costs features a dedicated banner pointing to a page with a description of the new tools. You have probably already gone through these documents, but this page provides the description, but also is useful because it provides the links to the two main documents, the vademecum and the FAQ document, answering already, I think, more than 30 questions that we came up with on the VNTs. And another important section on the VNT documentation can be found under the funding section of the cost website. You see documents and guidelines. Probably you're already well aware of this section. It has been updated with the documents on virtual networking tools, including the step-by-step user guide for eCosts. Now, I invite my colleague Carmencita to give a closer look at the updates on the vademecum. Carmencita?
Yes, thanks, Giuseppe. So as of 1st of May, we also launched the new cost vademecum that should include this new networking tools. Giuseppe, can you just do? Yes. So we added section 10 that should include the virtual networking tools, the two of them, virtual networking support grants, VNS, and virtual mobility grants. So we have two new acronyms to learn. So includes also the usual background, what are the eligibility rules? If you can just do, yes, evaluation and selection. It gives you clear guidance, better understanding of what we are talking about here today. It also includes implementation of activities, but not just ending there. And if we go to the next slide, Giuseppe. Yes, thanks. So it also describes virtual mobility grants in detail. So basically the same headings, what's eligible, the evaluation and selection really gives you a good idea and understanding of what these two new. It might take a while to better understand them, but we will get there. Also, we have listed in order to help you better understand what is actually non-eligible, what is not covered by these grants. So expenses that are already covered under the networking tools, obviously they should not overlap. So it's not meant to cover participation in an international conference, because we have dissemination meeting, and for those who are PhDs and early career coming from international, ITC, we have ITC conference grants, so to speak. Also, what is not eligible, considered not, under other than networking tools related to license fees, this still stands. It's not covered to, it's not intended to cover a database still, because this is still not eligible. Participation in conference I already mentioned, translation or interpretation services or expenses, and purchase of software for technical equipment, or buying a mobile phone or computer or anything like this. Yes, Giuseppe. So apart from the cost vademecum, we actually, together with the release, an FAQ document as well. I will put in the chat where you can find this. It's actually on the cost website. So we actually discovered the what, we tried to answer the what, because as individuals, we also had our own questions. And we thought that working with grant holders, these are some of the questions we can expect from you guys. So we also covered the who is eligible, and you will find it there. And how do you apply this on eCost? And you will, the application is available already on your eCost profile. Right. So I'll give you some sample questions, which actually might be of interest to you. So yes, one of them is, and I'll read it out loud anyway. So yeah, okay. Well, anyway, it's weird, the transition. I thought I already fixed this. But anyway, can the same applicant receive more than one virtual mobility grant in the same grant period? So the same person can exceptionally apply for multiple virtual mobility grants, but only if it's very well justified, and if the management committee considers that this is the best approach for the achievement of the action MOU objectives. However, of course, they should not overlap. One virtual mobility grant should finish before applying again for a second virtual mobility grant. Another sample question that you will find in this document is, can a grant holder manager apply for any of these grants? Yes, since these grants are open to all action participants with a primary affiliation to an institution located in a cost full member country or cooperating member. However, we should realize also that these tasks related to the successful completion of these grants should not overlap with the standard grant holder manager tasks. The usual, which is encoding meetings, treating travel reimbursements, sending grants via e-cost. So they should not overlap. One does not cover the other. Thank you, Giuseppe.
Thank you so much, Carmencita. Now, let's have also a closer look at e-cost, how it has changed, how it has been updated, and from an applicant perspective, actually what is needed to draft and submit a VNT grant application on e-costs. So the entry point, as usual, is logging with the user profile into e-costs. And as you can see, when you enter in e-costs, you can just see a box, VNT applications. And by clicking there, there is an overview of the virtual networking tool applications. So if some were already encoded, they will appear there. Otherwise, at the beginning, the overview will be empty. And if you want to encode a VNT grant application, you just click Apply for Grant. And then this opens the main application form. All the fields are mandatory to be filled, but some of them, like applicant name and applicant primary affiliation, are already pre-filled and non-editable. There is a same form for both the virtual mobility grant and the virtual networking support grant. So this is why under the type section, you need to specify for which type of grant you are applying. You also need to specify for which action you are applying, because there are also some action participants that participate in multiple actions, for instance. And let me also note that we say cost action, but actually we also, the virtual networking tools are available to the cost innovators grants because their implementation is follow the same rules of the cost action. So these VNTs are open to both, and the same application can be encoded on e-costs. Once the action is selected, the grant period relevant to the selected action is also pre-filled directly in the application form. And then the actual fields related to the application content need to be encoded. So the title of the VNT grant application, the requested amount. In this case, of course, it has to be within the limits of the financial rules for the specific grant. As Monica mentioned, for the virtual networking support grant, up to maximum 4,000 euros, and for the virtual mobility grant, up to maximum 1,500 euros. And finally, you need to select the bank account from the ones encoded in your e-cost profile. If you don't have any bank account encoded, basically this is a step that you have to fill in before encoding an application. This is a requirement. Once this step is completed, you need to upload some supporting documents, because so far actually the proposal for the virtual networking tool grant is not yet uploaded. You will see that under supporting documents, you can upload multiple supporting documents. In general, the application will consist probably of a single file in a PDF form. Here, the limit of 2 megabytes is in place in the system. But if you want to annex some screenshots or additional files, this is allowed by the system. Let me say that basically the actual content of the application needs to be drafted following using the content, the template that we make available for each VNT grant. So this is why let's have a look at these templates. For the virtual networking support grant, there are 2 sections to be filled in. and each of them has a maximum 500 words. The first one is about describing how the cost action can benefit from developing virtual networking activities. In this section, the focus should be on the progress towards the action objectives and deliverables, how will be the contribution to the cost excellence and the inclusiveness policy, especially supporting researchers from inclusiveness target countries, and also describe the stakeholder engagement and the promotion of participants from NNC and IPC. The second section is an outline of the strategy of virtual networking. So this is not the virtual networking strategy itself, it's just an outline. The strategy will need to be uploaded on eCost separately. So the applicant in this case needs to describe, in the limit of the 500 words, the approach for coordinating the virtual mobility grants by opening the calls, managing the evaluation process for awarding these grants, supporting and advising beneficiaries of the virtual mobility grants, and the other activities that were already explained by Monica. It's also important that there is a plan on how to coordinate and report on the planned action events that will be held online, and how this will be fitting to the overall action strategy. Let's now move to the virtual mobility grant templates. So unlike the previous template, for which you have not seen a specific start and end date, the virtual mobility grant needs also to include a start and end date of the virtual mobility grant within the limits of the grant period, applicable grant period. The first section concerns the description of the main objective of the virtual mobility grant, maximum 200 words. All the other sections have a maximum 500 words and are meant to describe the working plan, so the description of the collaborative initiative to be implemented. In this case, the grantee is a single individual, but the activity is a collaborative one. So there are also other action participants or other stakeholders involved. And this is exactly what is described in the plan for participation. So there is an indicative list of participants in the collaborative initiative and a short description of their expertise and envisaged contribution. In the section 4, the main expected outputs. So what are these outputs about and how they connect to the action objectives and deliverables? In relation to the objectives, they can either contribute to the research coordination or the capacity building objectives, or to both. And finally, the last section is about the contribution to the cost action strategy. So how the virtual mobility contributes to the cost excellence and inclusiveness policy, the plan for stakeholder engagement, the promotion of participation of researchers from cost NNC or IPC, and the fit to the approved virtual networking strategy, if available. The term here, if available, means that basically the action might also decide to go directly for virtual mobility grants and not for a virtual networking support grant. And this could be something that to speed up the uptake of the virtual mobility grants. In this case, the section 5 should refer mainly to the MOU objectives and deliverables. If there is a virtual networking strategy linked to the virtual networking support grant, then the section 5 should also refer to the approved virtual networking strategy. Another important novelty that comes with the virtual networking tools is a new leadership position, the virtual networking support manager. By default, at the beginning of the process, the MC chair is the default VNS manager. This is to not to allow basically the process to be executed on eCost from the beginning. But eCost in the leadership positions page that you also know well, you can reassign this position to other eligible participants. If your action assigns a virtual networking support grant, the assignment goes to the VNS grantee as a VNS manager. In case the action does not assign any virtual networking support grant, and the chair is already, let's say, overloaded with tasks or wishes to make space, for instance, for a young researcher to make some experience in this position, then another eligible participant from the action can be assigned as a virtual networking support manager. So in other words, ECOST also gives the flexibility when the action uses or not uses the VNS grant to choose the best profile in the action in the role of VNS manager. And this concludes this part of the presentation.